When waters in the ocean are angry, seamen would tell you that the best waters to swim and fish are when they're resembling oil, because that means that there's no crashing from the left, crashing from the right to cause the mixing. It's actually the best time to swim too and enjoy it. Now, 9/11 is a very touchy topic for many, but people always tell you who they are and what they stand for with their actions and words. As we all know, the Queen is on her way. It'll take her about 9 days to land. I want us to remember what Biden said in 2017.
The purpose of this joint session having been concluded pursuant to the Senate Concurrent Resolution 2 of the 115th Congress, the chair declares the joint session dissolved. God save the Queen.
God save the Queen. The last time I checked, we don't have a queen. Who is he referring to? Today, as I was perusing Truth Social, I'm almost thinking someone's in my, all up in my playlists. Sometimes like to play the same song again and again and again. Allow me to share this on my Facebook too. And this isn't a show to talk about left or right, because there is no left or right. You have a choice. Enter Wonderland and see what it is, or don't. Many people will tell you about conspiracy theories and things that may or may not be. And that's because what we fail to remember is that our tongue is one of the most powerful weapons we have. In fact, it is so that in many scriptures it is noted as such. As he does in all his letters when he speaks in them of these matters. There are some things in them that are hard to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures. The name of my show is Tori Says. Je parle. Wushu. Parlo. Anakatalam. Min Suiliman. Mina povun. Ich spreche. Mein Hart. Misanam. Hablo. Yagavario. Watashi wa hanasu. Milo. I speak. In any tongue, we speak. But then the question is, consentaje. Voi leister. Keskulab. Who listens? Yosakui, who listens? Who listens Anima de vil. I speak, but who listens? I guess it's those that have ears. And throughout over 5 years of shows, I have confessed to sins, but I'm also telling on others too. And it's unfortunate that it isn't heard because you confess with your mouth. And you confess because you wish to be saved. Here's a confession I've played over the years, but I do not believe people have heard it. This is how you understand what the plan is. I observed the early origin of its implementation. Young, ripe, and it's so amazing when people applaud you and tell you how awesome you are. You almost don't want them to be evil.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
Who was the general that told? Who was the general that told? And yet, as you can hear, people are laughing at something so horrific. Nobody ever asks, "Hey, Tori, you were this, contractor." Yeah, I was part of SASA, right? You were this contractor, part of SASA. What did you do after you decided to tell? You think there aren't many people like me out there right now that want to say something? Most of them have sold their souls. Most of them can't go back. And a lot of them are too embarrassed to destroy their family names and legacies for the stupid cause of redemption and just being honest. So when I came back to reality, let's say, I went to school. No one asked. That's really weird. You were never a scientist. Little known fact that many people don't know is that when all this was being discussed and put together. It was a very long time ago, before most of our times. And ironically, most of the biggest players come out of Chicago, which makes you kind of feel like, what is going on? Donald Rumsfeld. Do you guys know what he did for a living? Aside from, doing his thing and being part of the defense and joining the Navy. Do you know what he did? He was the one that put together one piece of the plan. So here's how the plan works in total global domination. You have to make the people succumb to it. Now, there were some people that helped, I guess, in a way, by steering them back in the 40s away from doing what they needed to do. But Rumsfeld actually was a massive, massive proponent to biological warfare. In fact, he was the CEO of General Instrument and the chairman of Gilead Sciences, right before they deployed all these vaccines at the end of the 90s. If you think COVID was happenstance, remember that the Chinese said, yes, it was here, but it was Americans that came here. It all started then. In the 70s, they decided to implement. And I can tell you what I've pieced together before I stepped in. Their goal was to emulate a very specific painting. It was actually sold in 1999 by Christie's. It was painted by Friedrich Resch. I think it's like Friedrich Morris or something, August Resch, right? The painting's called Checkmate. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but picture a chess table, and there's a man who's contemplating their move and looks like they're in checkmate, and the devil. And overseeing this is this angelic figure just paying attention to the chessboard. And it's called Checkmate because apparently man lost to the devil. The devil had the man in checkmate. But it turned out that that wasn't true. It was one time that a chess master actually saw the painting at the Louvre. And while everyone looked at it and said, oh, look, man lost to the devil. And, he realized, no, he didn't. There's one more move. Even though he looks like in checkmate, with one move, the man actually wins the game. And so that painting is exactly how everybody feels, I think, has been feeling for a very, very long time. And that's the story being told about this, apparently competitive chess master that saw it. But you have to think about it. It almost feels in life, from when we were kids, that we're always trying to escape situations. And what we don't realize, regardless of, what we believe in, what we think of, and, throwing common sense out the window and being told what to think. Hopeless situations, or situations that you might see are hopeless, are never hopeless because there's always that one chess move. Now let's talk politics. 9/11 was highly orchestrated. And I know this, and I'll tell you where my personal knowledge kicks in, okay? John Brennan used to be the CIA advisor to Bill Clinton. He advised Clinton of everything the CIA was doing in the 90s, right? That was his career. He's been in the agency forever and a day. Now, as John Brennan worked as the intelligence briefer, and he did it, I believe he did it right after he was in charge of the CIA's counter-terrorist center. Under Bush, right? And Reagan, he was just a trainee, I guess, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He was working at the embassies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because it was in 1980 that he actually supposedly joined the CIA. It was a little bit before that, but officially it was 1980, and he joined the Directorate of Intelligence in 82. I know this from talking with him. He explained to me his position as an attaché in Jeddah in the mid 80s, just right before 1985, I guess. And then he started to work on AIPAC after that, under the end of Bush's terms. And well, Bush Sr. was a 3-term president. We know that, but Reagan/Bush, right? And he then, under the Clinton era, was moved out of the counter-terrorist center to be a briefer. And in 95, he got his position as executive assistant to George Tenet. And one thing I've never told anyone is that one of the most important people that I met under my first disguise was George Tenet. And he didn't recognize that I was in disguise, which was the reason that I was in disguise. Anyway, in 1990, I want to say late 97, is when I first met and came in contact with John Brennan. He was the CIA chief in Saudi Arabia. And one thing that was being put forward in conversation was the fact that, there was an overwhelming amount of people applying for visas. And this was about a little over a year after the Kabar Towers bombing. So being kind of wet behind the ears, right? And young, and in between training sessions, I had conversations with people there right before I was leaving for training again back to the States. And one thing they told me was they found that the station chief, Brennan, was signing off visas to people that were barred from entering, like they failed or they were on a list from the original lists that the State Department had to not get visas, and he clearly overrid them. And, I thought to myself, maybe they're assets, maybe, this, right? So I actually asked that question prior to leaving to go back to the States, where I went to Arizona, and then to two Air Force bases. One was again in California, and the other one was in some Ohio, Pennsylvania border place. I think it was called Carapolis. So I actually got really drunk one day, and I got all my stuff stolen, and I played super dumb because I couldn't report it because I was worried I was going to lose clearances and everything by saying I was out drunk underage. Anyway, I remember that one of the guys that was down in Saudi Arabia, had come to the Air Force Base in California. And he was then going to Diego Garcia. And I mentioned to him on the base, I found it really bizarre, but they're probably assets, of the agency. And maybe those people that have been flagged were for that reason. And he goes, well, we've been told to not allow people that have specific skills to go in. So that was just the conversation, and they found it odd. So people were chatting about it, but it turned out because he was chatting about it, he was now being moved to Diego Garcia. That was funny. Now, fast forward, the bombing happens. And so if we have this bombing, right, obviously the Saudis hate us. And the more interesting part was that when this bombing happened, a move that was unexpected is something that I saw happen in 97 when I was there. They had pushed forward a program of fast tracking visas. Now, when I tell you fast tracking visas, we're talking giving people visas without checking their backgrounds. And that felt really alarming. In fact, I know many people claim, oh, we have all these politicians, they're dinosaurs, they've been in there for forever and a day. But we don't say that to people that we supposedly like, no matter what side of the party you are, Republican or Democrat. Nobody seems to think, well, I don't care, that they're in there long because I don't know, I like Pelosi, or I like Chuck Grassley, or I like Jim Jordan. Nevertheless, they've been in there for a while, right? So what makes you think that they're different? Are they all just unicorns because you like them? So just so you understand how long this has been going on, you must understand that this visa program was never actually approved. It was a CIA agency push. And this was done after the bombing. And you would say that makes no sense. If they hate us, right? Why are we fast tracking visas for people that hate us and have just exploded us? That makes zero sense. Why would John Brennan step in after the bombing, after being the executive assistant to George Tenet? Why would he come to Saudi Arabia and expedite visas? And this was unofficial, right? Unofficial. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. We have the same players because they're the executors. So while we talk about the Guantanamo trials for 9/11, it is incomplete because the masterminds are missing. You would have to have former impeached President of the United States, Bill Clinton, in his capacity of President of the United States, and impeached First Lady Hillary Clinton for initiating the plan. Literally, it's called the plan. Former CIA Director John Owen Brennan, in his capacity as CIA briefer to impeached President Clinton, executive assistant to CIA Director George Tenet, CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia, chief of staff to CIA Director George Tenet, drafting the agency portion of the plan. Former DNI Director James Clapper, in his capacity as DIA Director under impeached President Clinton and as NGA Director, assisting the cover-up of the plan. And Donald Rumsfeld, in his capacity as Secretary of Defense, for implementing the war operation and the military-industrial complex privatized side to facilitate and capitalize the plan. And finally, former President George Bush Jr., in his capacity as president, for knowingly and willingly allowing the plan. And just so you understand, Hillary Clinton wanted to do everything Obama did. In the 90s, when they took office, and I say they because we all know that she manages everything, Hillary Care was supposed to take into effect. It was supposed to be put together properly. They needed to propel the harnessing of information. It was impeached President Clinton that was struggling on how to deploy surveillance and data collection systems within the United States. And this is where the idea was born. Digitizing citizen records from birth to death, monitoring all phone calls and communications, collecting facial recognition, health data aggregation. That was Hillary Care, but Obamacare did it for them. Controlled and documented travel, and doing that with the cyber oligarchs we see today, which DARPA helped create. It wasn't that we advanced in technology. They harnessed all these cyber oligarchs, from people in their garages like Steve Jobs to Wernick. All of these people were harnessed and made part of this fourth unelected branch of government to deploy the plan. Brennan and Clapper were responsible for ensuring the recruitment in 1995 through 2001 was completed for a scheme to terrorize Americans and others around the world into submission by giving an avenue for solutions by law and implementing technology that would assist. That's the warranted assumption from the personal knowledge gained after such events. I saw the implementation. This was the plan they had. It was always the plan. In 1996, when the Qatar Tower bombing happened, the CIA already knew it was going to happen. In fact, there's evidence of that was discovered during whatever investigations they were doing. The actual executors of the event were people John Owen Brennan had allowed onto the grounds of Building 131 prior to the bombing. How do I know this? Because it was documented. And I have sent out FOIA requests for visitor logs and guests of the CIA station chief, John Owen Brennan, that have been denied to date. It's actually an annex in Bahrain that began the operation in 92. And was alleged to have been the mode of cable communications regarding this incident, which the CIA has denied the existence of. Remember, 19 U.S. service members lost their lives, and it was none other than former DIA at the time, Director Clapper, along now with a deceased General Dowling, who died of meningitis, whatever, who led the task force in the Qatar Towers investigation. Again, the bombing was imperative to excuse the attack on U.S. soil years later. It was during that time of the bombings that many of the visa applications from Saudi Arabia were being denied, right? They were being denied because of the bombings. And in fact, visa applications of the majority of the hijackers during 9/11 were denied right before and after the bombings, but John Owen Brennan personally overrode the denials and issued the migrant visas. In fact, in 1999, I was back in Saudi Arabia when visa applications were coming into question with a large delegation of SASA persons like myself, which is a group of Security Alliance intelligence contractors, just so you know. So in November of 1999, I was pregnant and I didn't know it. I personally reviewed and was made aware of approvals done by John Owen Brennan, who at the time was, going to be officially promoted to Deputy Executive Director of the CIA. And I was briefed on the Visa Express program because that was to be deployed to European nations as well as Saudi Arabia. And like the 19 U.S. service members that died at the Qatar Tower, 19 hijackers helped execute the 9/11 attacks. And all 19 of them received their visas before and after the Qatar Tower bombing. And all 19 were done with John Owen Brennan's stamp of approval from Jeddah. In fact, the deployment of Visa Express helped the support staff of less than 5 of the hijackers enter the United States with legal visas, because you're not going to execute this plan without having people watching your back, from bag boys to drivers to rentals to food to anything that you're doing. So right before the 9/11 event, right before, over 22,000 visas were issued by the State Department to foreign nationals that weren't all Saudi either. They weren't all Saudi nationals, but they were given the stamp of approval from Jeddah without interviews. So they just went there, applied, and here you go, go. George Bush himself was briefed on the program. In fact, he was briefed on the whole map to victory, indicating a list of all nations the U.S. would be able to declare war with because of this event. That unnamed general you heard who told Rumsfeld. Let's listen to that again so you can understand just how shameless these people, they're shameless. They are extremely shameless, but they laugh about it too. He tells you this and it's like, whatever, right? Let's see, here we go.
Days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
And here we have people laughing at that. Did they not do what they said? Who was the general that told on Rumsfeld? And obviously it was Bush that got him cornered for telling people. Who? So I'll tell you, when they were starting to railroad people for, Patriot Act and all this, right? It was coming down the pipeline. But there was also elections coming down the pipeline. So in order for them to actually execute the plan of taking over nations, they found that it would be very, very difficult for them to push it through. And this was another plan that was set up. And this was done under the Clinton administration. How do we ensure that we can have continuity of government within the United States and other nations? Rather than us continuously go to war, like now we're going to do it because the market's going to drop. We've taken all the cyber oligarchs and we are harnessing them all. Never listen to movies they tell you about amazing things discovered. They're rarely true. And most of the stuff you see in Hollywood are written by some intelligence analyst sitting in Langley. Okay, I'm telling you that now. The plan was that they needed to ensure the continuity of government. And Clinton was being impeached. And this was a problem because there were defiant people within Congress and the Senate that wanted to ensure that their own person gets in. And they all played good cop, bad cop, of course. And George Bush Sr. came up with a fantastic plan in his, in Jeb's area, the child that was left behind by the Bushes. We're going to digitize the way they vote. Because if we can see how foreigners vote, then that's how it happens. How do we do that? We need to show shortcomings in how it is. And I was actually in that meeting myself where the discussion of the hanging chads was being done. How do we remove human error and go all in on technology now that's everyone on Netscape and loving the internet and it's new, and we have the media talking about, getting on their website when people didn't even own computers at the time. If you remember on TV, you would have seen your news saying, go to our website, and you'd be like, yo, I don't even have a computer. Like, what are you talking about? Right? So at that point, that was discussed. And it was created into this big thing. But this is how they allocated funds to the Department of Defense, specifically DARPA, to come up with how to get it done and to create the software that would assist in getting it done. And you guys have heard Chris Curtis himself confess in Congress of how he was hired by a Chinese named company and the government. And he even slipped and said, George Bush, he slipped and said it. He said it himself in order to be able to control elections, because they needed to ensure that their own people that would have the ability for the continuity of government from the minute Reagan was shot until 2020 was done. They needed to ensure that continuity. So elections was one. We can't go into all these places and just plunder. We should do it in a more peaceful way. We can create riots and then come in as the good guy and offer them ways to elect things. And so this software was created in 2004. Paul Brinkley and Robert Gates, who also then became CIA director of a very specialized division in the Department of Defense, within a year were funded, and they got this done. And at that point, Chris Curtis's, software failed because, they got caught, kinda, and he confessed to Congress. Where is he now? In Florida. It's ridiculous how people, for the love of money, do anything. And it was at that point that we actually sold machines, and we went down to Venezuela and we told, Chavez, hey, dude, here, look, we'll help you win elections all the time. People think they'll be voting for you and you'll be winning, and they can check it and you'll see how all this is done. And while you do that, we're going to be training the software to be even better. So even your finest, cyber people won't. I mean, he was a dictator, like he cared, but he wanted to make it look like he was fair, right? And you know whose idea that was? It's the weirdest thing. It was someone that was the ambassador to NATO, just like Donald Rumsfeld. He was also the chief U.S. liaison to the Republic of China. His name was David Bruce. David Bruce. I mean, he had a tragedy befit him. His two children, well, his daughter and her husband. You know who he is? His dad or father-in-law was Mellon from Carnegie, from Mellon Bank and whatnot, right? He went to the American School in London. He was one of the biggest intelligence assets our nation had in the 50s all the way up to the late 70s with Gerald Ford. He helped implement all of this. And during the right after the Nazi war, he was the ambassador to France and Germany and the UK and then China, of course, right? So this isn't just some happenstance person. It was his idea of rigging the elections, because that's something that the Chinese were already doing because people weren't allowed to question authority. I wanted to throw in actual names of people that did this. And so you understand, Bruce was no stranger to psychological operations, as his children were huge proponents of the Council of United Civil Rights Leadership. And it was his daughter and her husband, Stephen Currier, who met with Martin Luther King Jr. and actually is alleged that assisted in his assassination. as they felt that him being assassinated would give more merit to the grievances that the people had, just so that you understand context here. So as we move on, we had multiple portions. We had the war plan of what they were going to do in order to dominate for oil and geography, because not a lot of people understand just how important the Middle East and the land of Turkey spatially are, how important they are. They link up, 3 continents: Africa, which is an untapped wealthy continent, Europe, and Asia. And they give access to it all. And every large nation wishes to have access to that land and dominance. Now, as all of these parts, which is the let's terrorize the Americans so we can digitize them and control them, therefore we can create the monitoring systems that we can deploy over in other countries too. This was all in conjunction with the Crown and other big leaders, such as the Chinese, the Russians, sort of, not really. Gorbachev wasn't really his cup of tea. Putin played both sides of the fence very well, and you can see him coming up really hard now. Now, as we see, the elections were the more nonviolent route, and this was a very important project. 9/11 was imperative. The market was going to collapse because they were going to collapse it, because they wanted technology to fizzle and bust. And this is why we had the tech bubble bust. And post 2000, even though technology was rapidly advancing and people were getting more immersed in it, for some reason, everybody lost their money during the tech bubble. And you're just like, what happened, right? What happened? How did we lose money, but everything's being implemented? That's because the government took hold of it. And you were too busy worrying about your safety to look at it. And this is how you make a shift in the market. And so we have John Brennan executing the plan to get people to fall on their knees, begging out of fear and forfeiting their rights for that. At the same time, the Department of Defense under Rumsfeld was working really, really hard and fast on biological warfare. And this is where anthrax comes in. That is what he was working on. He was more of the person thinking that what we have to do is control the people from the inside out, not only from outside forces, but inside. Either we make them dependent on medication, or we change them where the strongest and the survive, and therefore we can provide everything they need and they'll be happy. I think we've heard Klaus say the same words, Klaus Schwab, where, you'll own nothing and love it, right? And this all came from our own government. Well, many people would like to say it was this person and that person, and they were all fronts. It was the U.S. government. It was Rumsfeld. Remember, he sat on the board of Gilead. Okay? He sat on the board. Bush Sr. started the process. The process was attenuated with that redneck from Arkansas. It was his wife that did it, right? She wanted to be president, but the 90s wouldn't let her. So he just pretended to be president while she was really in charge. And so the plan was born. This was the plan. The plan was for dominance. I know we as a nation want to be strong, and we want to be powerful, and we want to stand, and compete. And that is what true competition is. That is what true people do. But these people did not have that. 9/11 was how they got to you. 9/11 is how they got away with violating our privacy, throwing more people in jail, curbing our speech, becoming the thought police, and smothering us in technology like nobody's business. They pushed us into technology faster than we could blink. I'm a Gen Xer. I remember a time when we had corded phones and TVs that were static. And I remember that when I was like, 10 years old, 11, we had portable TurboGrafx 16 TVs that we could play video games on. And that was whoa. And then these big clunky bricks that my dad had that were supposedly car phones, right? And suddenly it went from 0 to 100. We had computers, we were networked, we were chatting, we were on, we were connected across the planet like nobody's business. We were so bombarded with so much new stuff. It's like a baby when you shine little toys, in front of their face, and then they're just like, I don't know where to look. Do I look over this bell, this color, right? Now, this is the straight from start to finish. This is their plan. This was their plan all along. It wasn't extremely intricate. It was very well distributed. It was very well executed, and everyone played their part correctly. I mean, think about it. 9/11 happened. We were convinced all of this was okay. I'm going to show you how it's really bizarre that everything is okay, because here's what research tells you. Actually funded research. Let me put that up. There it is. Bring you up a document that you probably haven't seen. I talked about it briefly in 2020 when it came out, but people are so busy with memes and what's going on now that it's like they're running and they can't catch up. So, oh wow, it will not let me share it like that. That's interesting. Let's do it another way. I apologize. For some reason, my computer does not allow me to share a PDF screen in a browser. I have to share it on the Adobe software. So I'm rendering that now. I'm going to provide you evidence of how, well, obviously the evidence exists anyway, of how this was all planned. But I'm going to show you something you can't refute, no matter how much you don't want to see. As you know, in Guantanamo, there have been trials about 9/11, right? Tons of trials about 9/11. But for some reason, such a bizarre reason, we're not, the majority of them were let go and others are still in jail, but nothing's really going on. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And they're responsible for all of these things, right? Well, here's where, let me share the window. I have to share the window. I'm sorry. There we go. All right. Let's see if you can see it. There we go. All right. So let's see how I can. This is the structural reevaluation of the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 building. This is a final report that was done from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, South Carolina Department of Transportation, Associate Professor of Nanjing University, Department of Civil Engineering, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. This was prepared, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. This is an actual report that was issued in March of 2020. And I want you to understand that this study, I'm going to read this out because I do have a podcast version. This report presents the findings and conclusions of a 4-year study of the collapse of the World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story building that suffered a total collapse at 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, following the horrible events that morning. The objective of the study was threefold: Examine the structural response of the World Trade Center 7 to fire loads that may have occurred on September 11th in 2001. Rule out scenarios that could not have caused the observed collapse, and identify types of failures and their locations that may have caused the total collapse to occur as observed. So they go into detail of how they get this done. And it's their abstract and their citations and schematics. I'm going to scroll right through that because they have a lot of figures. But the summary claims that the study was conducted by a 3-person team of researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, with funding provided by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, Inc. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization. I highly suggest you look into that organization to see how many good people actually exist. According to the National Institute of Standards of Technology, now, what I'm about to read to you indicates just how NIST is not an authority that should be cited for anything. It's almost like the Lancet Journal. You know how they put that COVID stuff in there and talked about how hydroxychloroquine is bad for you and causes heart issues when they knew it was a lie. This tainted the existence of NIST. I don't care who you are. If you tell me NIST gave me an ISO certificate, that's the equivalent to me as a Cracker Jack box, party favor, or a toy in your cereal box. It means nothing. NIST is an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce that investigated the 3 building failures on 9/11. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was the first known instance of total collapse of a tall building, primarily due to fires. However, many independent researchers have studied the collapse and assembled a body of evidence that raises questions about the validity of NIST's conclusions. The objective of the study, therefore, was threefold, like we said earlier. First, they simulated the local structural response to fire loading that may have occurred below floor 13, where most of the fires in World Trade Center 7 are reported to have occurred. Second, we supplemented our own simulation by examining the collapse initiation hypothesis developed by NIST, which, by the way, was guided by none other than James Clapper, and none other than the CIA, and none other than the military industrial complexes, and actually a company that Rumsfeld helped put together. So having said that, they said we also reviewed the collapse initiation hypothesis advanced by private engineering firms whose studies were commissioned as part of litigation related to the collapse of the World Trade Center 7. Third, we simulated several scenarios within the overall structural system in order to determine what type of local failures and their locations may have caused the total collapse to occur as observed. Before conducting a thorough and detailed evaluation of the building response due to fire and other issues, we examined the building condition following the failure of World Trade Center buildings 1 and 2. Some debris impact damage is reported to have occurred at the lower southwest corner of the building, which we accounted for in simulating the building response. So here on your screen, you see the document. I will be dropping this PDF on Telegram so you can go through the whole report. Here is what they found. Here's how they point it out. They tell you the framing for the floor, where it is. They've put it out very well and nicely. So their first finding: fire did not cause the collapse of the World Trade Center 7. The principal conclusion of our study is that fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that study the collapse, meaning all of these other agencies, companies, contractors said whatever they were told to say. This was an extreme cover-up because your own government did it. I know people don't like to hear that. I know we want to say that it was other people. I know we do. But this is the bare naked truth. And these people are still making money off of you. They are still out free while they did this to us. They ushered people to enslave themselves with this whole thing. And primarily, majority of them are dead. Brennan and Clapper are not. And if anything, they should be held accountable for this. And I'm shocked that those that have been in office since this happened still haven't been able to nail them. Because there's a lot of me's that have come out. Yes, many of them are gone now. Because you're not allowed to flap your mouth. The difference, I think, is maybe someone has just a little bit more faith in the big guy, right? Again, this conclusion is based on a number of findings from different analyses. Together, they show that fires could not have caused a weakening or displacement of structural members capable of initiating any hypothetical local failures alleged to have triggered the total collapse of the building. Here's what they did find. Near simultaneous failure of every column explains the collapse. You mean explosive placed at the foundations to bring down the columns. The secondary conclusion of our study is that the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. This conclusion is based primarily upon the finding that the simultaneous failure of all core columns over 8 stories, followed 1.3 seconds later by the simultaneous failure of all exterior columns over 8 stories, produces almost exactly the behavior observed on the videos of the collapse, whereas no other sequence of failures that we simulated produced the observed behavior. We cannot completely rule out the possibility that an alternative scenario may have caused the observed collapse. However, the near simultaneous failure of every column is the only scenario we identified that was capable of producing that behavior. I hope you understood that. They clearly said that this was a coordinated failure. So this happened at 5 o'clock. This is the building. Let me zoom out. This is the building. This is the model as viewed from the south side. And they go into where the planes went, where this was. This is World Trade Center 7. Now think of it this way. If this wasn't coordinated and it wasn't planned, right? Would they have had time to set up explosive to have near simultaneous failure of all the columns? I want you to think about it. Would they have had time? Did they like sit there and say, holy crap, all these people are jumping out of buildings and all these planes came in and this is so scary and we're terrified and we don't know how this is going to respond. Is the whole building going to fall? Like, is all of New York going to be wiped out? What if there's a nuclear bomb on the plane? Something, right? So while they're doing that, they're planning a controlled demolition at World Trade Center 7. Come on, man. Come on. Are we serious? And this is the thing. This is the thing. We can't have 9/11 trials when we don't have the masterminds there. We need to see Clinton there. We need to see Bush there. We need to see Brennan there. We need to see Clapper there. And we need to posthumously disgrace Rumsfeld for everything that he's done. Now let's continue. Oops, let me get back to the page. So here they show you the distance. So we have these buildings falling, but this one is controlled demolition. Here's the World Trade Center 7 seen from the north on September 11th, right? So while all this is going on, they're planting bombs? No, it was already done. Here are the floors. IRS, DOD, CIA. Look at the tenants. Look at the tenants. Come on, man. Like it's, you know, every time I see it and we're like, we'll never forget. You already forgot. Because the people that orchestrated this were ruling you and they still are. And they're the ones against America right now. And every person on the right and the left is applauding them. They did a thorough study. Thorough. So thorough, it's like beyond thorough. They tried everything that might have gone wrong. They tried to see, and they came to the conclusion that all The structural beams were taken out almost simultaneously on the first 8 floors. Let's go again to the tenants. Lobby, dock, conference center, lobby, switchgear, generators, transformers, switch, OEM, American Express, Secret Service, SEC, Provident Financial, vacant. And all there. I mean, this was a government building, pretty much. Can we agree on that? This was a government operation, pretty much. Can we all agree on that? And so what all of us should be doing right now as a nation, both left and right, is demanding that they be held accountable. Demanding that they be held accountable. Because they have planned this. They have planned this. This isn't, this isn't rocket science. It's a very simple, organized operation. They took all your rights away by putting you in fear. They created an enemy that didn't exist. I mean, maybe the Middle East didn't like us, but they weren't going to kill us. You know why? Because we give them all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So they wouldn't have done it. Let's be straight. Okay? Leave them alone. They leave you alone. It was our own people that orchestrated this. Hillary, Bill, John, Jim, James, Robert. Oh my God, the names are just recycling too. We've got John Kerry, right? All of these people are involved. They all know. And now a lot of people will say that Mayor Giuliani knew. I didn't think he would have reacted the way he did. And the stress he had, my gosh. Is he convinced that this wasn't an inside job? I don't know. He's never answered that question. But if you ask me what I think he thinks, right, without him, I think he gets it. These are the people that gave us vaccines to control us, medications to enslave us, fear to further enslave us, fear and questions to further divide us, social justice so they can divide us even more. And you know what I did? I watched them do it in other countries. I am not worthy of any redemption. You might say, why didn't you say anything sooner? Where was I going to go? Was I supposed to go to the president, who probably got the general that told on Rumsfeld excommunicated? We should all find out who that is. Was I supposed to go to the media that they own? So the question you should be asking yourself is, well, Chuck Grassley knew about this. Oh, no, he's a good guy. He is a good guy. But why hasn't anything been done about this? See, there was a cable that was leaked, trying to get them in trouble, trying to make them stop what they were doing, only because I was concerned about the biowarfare more than anything, because of the programs that we're already deploying in Africa through these private companies. And this is why I call them cyber oligarchs, right? Because biotechnology is considered technology, so it falls under that. But there was a person who I had, and I had that person, I convinced that person to drop a cable that they received. And just so you know, that person was actually, that reporter was arrested. He wasn't arrested. I think he was more detained, right? So the reporter was actually detained. Let me read this out to you. This is what was sent to Colin Powell from Senator Grassley and Representative Weldon. Listen to this. Dear Secretary Powell, this is dated July 16, 2002. We're writing to express our concern about the detention and questioning of reporter Joel Mowbray at the State Department on Friday, July 12th. As a senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and chairman of the House Government Reform Subcommittee on Civil Service, we have concern that government agencies not take appropriate actions that cast a shadow over our free press. Mr. Mowbray recently wrote several articles that brought into question the Visa Express program administered in Saudi Arabia. These articles, in part, prompted us to write to you to state that the program must be ended. As members of Congress who have spent years performing oversight of government agencies, we recognize that many agencies do not cherish scrutiny from Congress or the media. However, such oversight is critical to the checks and balances that make our government work. I'm going to pause for a second because I'm getting irritated. This sounds very well written. This sounds extremely righteous. It sounds exactly like what we want them to say. But that was 2002. Now add 20 years to that. Chuck Grassley is still there and we're still under their regime. So I want to make that clear because I am very upset. Because I have stuck my neck out so many times in my life. And when I see things like this, I get upset. I get very upset. Now let's continue this righteous letter. Let me pull it back up. Okay. It is for this reason that we are troubled that the actions of the State Department security officials effectively chilled the work of the media and the whistleblowers who are so vital to exposing problems in our government. Also, it is our understanding that the focus of the questions to Mr. Mowbray was about the sources of the cable in question and other information he has reported. If this is the case, it is troubling that the State Department officials were more worried about finding a whistleblower than actually retrieving the cable. We would appreciate you providing a full accounting of what took place regarding the incident with Mr. Mowbray on Friday, July 12th. Specifically, we would like to know who, name and title, made the decision to detain, question Mr. Mowbray, as well as the legal basis and justification for this action. In your response, include the number of officials involved in the incident, their name and title, what role they played, and whether they were armed. Please note that if a security official did not ask any questions but was present to ensure Mr. Mowbray could not leave, we would consider that official to be involved in the incident. The comments of the State Department officials and media accounts state that the action was taken against Mr. Mowbray because contents of a classified cable were disclosed. Assuming that your justification for action against Mr. Mowbray is that the cable was classified, we would note that the information in the cable was reported in other publications. Were other reporters also questioned? If not, why was only one reporter singled out? Also, did security officials attempt to retrieve the cable from Mr. Mowbray? And if so, what steps were taken to do this? If not, please explain why. In addition, we would appreciate an objective review of justification of the classification of the cable cited in the news accounts. We have seen too often that documents are routinely and unnecessarily classified as confidential or above, particularly in cases where the information does not involve national security, but instead is embarrassing, or I would say reveals crimes, to a government agency. Finally, please inform us what State Department's policy is in regards to questioning and detaining reporters regarding sources and information. In particular, who decides at the Department of State to take such actions, and how often has it been done in the past 5 years? This was a letter sent in 2002. And the reason was because he was someone who revealed the Visa Express program, which unfortunately was only mentioned about Saudi Arabia because obviously it was people from Saudi Arabia that, hijacked airplanes, and all of those people from Saudi Arabia that hijacked airplanes were not all Saudis, and all their visas were personally approved by John Brennan. Now let's take a look at the account of this gentleman's occurrence and what happened. Poor Joel. And he's like so quiet now, such a great reporter. Reporter detained, told to reveal source at State Department briefing. Reporter detained, told to reveal source at State Department briefing. U.S. officials and guards held a National Review reporter for questioning on his access to a confidential document on the U.S. visa policy in Saudi Arabia. This is because John Brennan was getting caught, okay? Oh, which, by the way, well, we'll get to it. Guards and a federal agent detained a reporter after a State Department briefing on July 12th, demanding that he disclose a source and answer questions about his recent reporting on a State Department document. The reporter, Joel Mowbray, said he was held for half an hour while officials questioned him. The briefing concerned a classified cable about the Saudi visa issuing system, which Mowbray had reported on critically in the National Review. After testifying, Mowbray was stopped by an unidentified woman and 4 armed guards upon leaving the briefing. Soon, the 26-year-old reporter was confronted and questioned by a plainclothes agent from Diplomatic Security Service. It was surreal. It started out rather benignly, Mowbray said, but then they asked how I got the cable and where I got it from, and I realized they were looking for my source. Mowbray said he denied having the confidential cable with him and was not searched. The armed guards prevented him from leaving the building throughout the questioning. The reporter used his cellular phone to call his editors and an attorney, during which time the security guard told Mowbray he was in fact not being detained. Minutes later, when he tried to walk away, another guard physically stopped him, saying, "Now you're being detained," according to Mowbray. Mowbray was released about 15 minutes later with no explanation. Mowbray said his magazine had contacted the department during this time. The Associated Press reported that an anonymous department official said no employees or visitors are allowed to exit the building with classified documents, and Mowbray should have expected to be questioned. There's the AP throwing cover. Editors defended Mowbray's possession of the paper, saying he should legally be able to leave the building with anything he entered with. Mowbray said he brought the cable in order to juxtapose its contents against what the State Department claims it had included. Earlier, National Review articles say the cable sent to the State Department from U.S. Ambassador Robert Jordan calls for an end to the Saudi visa program that may have allowed 3 of the September 11th hijackers to enter the United States. Although the contents are considered classified, both Mowbray and the Post reported on the same document earlier in the week. State Department spokesperson Richard Boucher criticized the National Review's coverage of the visa policy just before the detainment, calling Mowbray to be careful about the facts. But the reporter defended his work, saying there was no need for Boucher to smear the reporting. National Review editor Rich Lowry wrote a letter to Richard Boucher of the State Department, also published in National Review July 15th, defending his reporter's writing and asking for an explanation for the department's thuggish attempt to extract information from a reporter. He said Mowbray posed no security threat by possessing the document, nor had it been kept secret. So the only reason then to hold Mr. Mowbray against his will in the building must have been to intimidate a young reporter who had made your life difficult. Authorities are investigating the Saudi visa fraud, and a top department official, Assistant Secretary of State Mary Ryan, was asked to resign July 10th. Mowbray has been vocal on this issue, even outside of the pages of the magazine and on its website. He testified at the House Government Reform Subcommittee last month, at which the Post reported he called the visa office a bloated bureaucracy trapped in the death grip of inertia. Although Mowbray was shocked by the detainment, he said he will continue writing about the visa system using confirmed but undisclosed sources. They will never deter me, he said. Now, obviously, they did deter him. He should have been, the Sarah Carter, the John Solomon. He was an incredible, bold man to just, at 26, just do that and just tell the truth. It's really, really hard. Now, obviously, the person that resigned was implicated in the cable, no need to say, right? But I'm telling you the whole story, the whole thing that I know of from firsthand. I can tell you that this isn't supposed to end well at all. And many times, when I say things, I have an advantage. It's not, I'm different. I have more information. Now, it doesn't matter what you believe. It's just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it's not true. Okay. The concerns that we should all have as a nation is that sometimes you have to start at the beginning to fix things. It's almost like when you want to make your bed. For those of you, that have like a queen or a king size bed and you're by yourself. If one part comes out, then the other part comes out. So what you have to do is start at the beginning and grab the two corners and get it done. 9/11 this time around should be about truth. It's been over 20 years. So there's a lot of people that could come forward and speak because their statute of limitations. And if anything, there could be a statute of limitation in regards to John Brennan, but there's other things that can tie it back to that. So we're good. And that'll come when I have to testify against him at some point. Now, remember, 9/11 happened because John Brennan allowed it to happen. 9/11 happened because the Clintons wanted it to happen. 9/11 happened because the Bushes wanted it to happen. 9/11 happened because Clapper wanted to happen. Clapper actually became part of the geospatial agency, right? Almost immediately, 2 days after. Well, he was hired in August, right before 9/11, because they knew it was going to happen. But they officially said, because I knew that for a fact, like that was fact. He started in August of 2001, and his job was to cover up the tracks of what was happening, and so he could have control of allowing airspaces. You could take that to the bank. There are so many people implicated that includes Congress and Senate. And so what we have to do is take it from the beginning. And if anything, we should take 9/11 because we shouldn't forget it. Didn't they tell us that? 9/11, never forget. And it wasn't about the oil. It was about the land access. Oil is fantastic, but let's not kid ourselves. The Middle East doesn't have the oil the America has. America's. Venezuela's got 333 years of pumping oil. Saudi Arabia's got 15. All right? You could do the math. Now, also, remember that it was John Voight that actually crossed paths with some of these hijackers, and he picked it up from his training as an actor, from pointing out these things. He had a whole affidavit on it where they actually questioned him. Once again, well, many of you say, it's about power and oil. No, I want you to hear this again, and I want you to let this sink in. This is a leader of a nation. A leader of a nation. A leader of a nation that said this. We've got to remember, this is a leader of a nation that said this. We should not be okay with this, because what if it wasn't your leader and it was someone else? How would you feel about it? You wouldn't be very happy, would you? I want you to listen to it again, and I want you to pay attention to how comical they're making it sound when it's actually quite grave and scary.
I went through the Pentagon, and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me.
And they laugh. Now, what if that was another country? Let's just say, what if that was Xi Jinping saying that? Oh, we got a list. And we're going to take over all these nations. France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Czechoslovakia, and then we're going to go for the U.S. Why? I don't know. If we have a hammer, everything's got to look like a nail. How would you feel? That's not something funny. The one thing that I've always said, and you heard it from Bush Jr.'s mouth. He told you that, right? Oh, it's James Wood. James Wood, not John Voight. Thank you. It's James Woods. Thank you for correcting me. It came out of Bush's mouth. He said it 10 days after 9/11. Al-Qaeda was created. Osama used to be called Usama. He was trained by the CIA. This was all planned. The poor Saudis, they had him by the cojones. I mean, we should find out what happened to Khashoggi. A lot of people aren't going to be very happy with how that comes out. Tit for tat. We shouldn't accept that. God doesn't like that. No. It was Woods, not Voight. And I apologize. I misspoke. I had him in my mind. Thank you for correcting me. I'm just very upset because this is very close to me, only because I was there. It was actually Bush that spoke of this. General Wesley Clark is just speak. So many people speak. Did you know that he I'm gonna keep it at that. Just understand that this 9/11, all of us should be demanding accountability on all fronts. Across the nation, you have them losing their mind for demanding accountability for elections. And I'm telling you, and I don't care what anyone says, your elections are rigged, and rigged. There is evidence of that. And I'm going to bring it home as much as I can till my last breath. They're going to have to take me out because I will not stop fighting. That's the way it is. I said that when they came after me with bullshit things to make me kneel. And I was not having it. I was not having it. I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to stand there in flames because there's no way I'm bending the knee. That's exactly how I phrased it. And none of us should do that, especially in a time like this. Allowing them to take us for a ride and do as they wish. It's unacceptable. And we should not allow this to happen. Ever. Now, as you know, election officials are very, very upset. And this is just one, tidbit of showing you just how much change you have. You guys have sent so many emails and letters out that they have lost their mind. In fact, in my state, I've sent them letters for retention, and they know I'm in litigation and still ask, what's your litigation? It's all as if they have a cookie cutter thing. This is how rats act. They act vicious and nasty. But yesterday, a lot happened. The witch is dead. And we had our F&I speech by the Federal Reserve, right? And like I said, when the bells start tolling, this is it. And all across England, the bells have been tolling. So on that note, I'm going to have to jump off of Facebook and YouTube because I'm going to play a clip from Bannon this morning where Mike Lindell and him talk about how the election authorities are very upset. So join us on